So welcome to the show, Barbara and Gary.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Okay, so Barbara, we're going to start with you a little bit today. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, come back with me to 1986. I'm in the hospital. My husband walks into the room with a box of tissues. I don't have a cold. I'm pregnant with triplets, about to give birth.
Wow.
And he sits in this oversized chair, and he hands me the box and says, "Take a tissue." I'm not a crier, and don't have a cold. How do you start the conversation? He didn't know how to say, "Your father just shot himself in his head. He killed himself." So he was thinking a box of tissues would be the first thing to do because he didn't know what to do. And I could not believe that my father, this loving, devoted husband and father, actually killed himself in my childhood bedroom. But he did it because he had deteriorating discs in his back. And his suicide note said, "I can't live with the pain any longer." So he was a New York City police officer, retired. My mother also was one of the first New York City police officers when they had to wear a skirt to work, you know, one of the first.
She was a New York City police officer?
Yeah, she
Your
was
mother?
Yes,
Wow.
one of the first New
That
York
is
City
so cool.
cops. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. And she kept her weapon. So one day they were lying in bed enjoying the morning, and he said, "You know, can you go to the fridge and get something out to eat?" And she said, "Sure." And he went into my bedroom while she was getting something out of the freezer, and he said to her, "Did you get something?" And she said, "Yeah, but how's chicken?" And he said, "Chicken's fine." And then she heard the gunshot.
Wow.
It was so simple. So silly when you think of the verbiage that was said, and so shocking. And he died 3 weeks before my babies were born.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And just the idea of you about to give birth and being in that space.
Well, I couldn't attend the funeral. I couldn't attend any of the rituals. That's why today rituals are so important to me as a bereaved daughter, because I didn't have any of that. But while I think it was the day before the funeral, one of my friends came to the hospital, and she gave me a flower, a rose, and she said, "I know you're not going to be able to go to your father's funeral, but keep the rose overnight, keep it on your pillow, and tomorrow give it to someone to bring to the cemetery and place on your father's coffin or the casket, and then this way something that you had would be with him." Because I couldn't be there.
I like that idea.
And to this day, I know that the rose that I touched was with my dad.
I love that ritual. And I think you're bringing up a good point about suicide. People are in great, great pain. And all they're thinking about is, I need to be out of this pain. Not necessarily I need to be out of this life, but I need to be out of this pain.
That's right. Whether it's physical or emotional, it is pain.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be depression. He never suffered from depression. He suffered from physical agony.
Right. Exactly. And I'm just thinking about you then going on to have your triplet boys, and it must have been an amazing thing, but bittersweet also.
Well, when I brought them home from the hospital, the first week that I brought them home, my mother said, "We have to celebrate." And I said, "Daddy just died a few weeks ago. I just got home." And she said, "Put your big girl panties on. We're having a party," just like Mame, you know, just like from the play. And I said, "Are you sure you want to have a party?" And she said, "We're celebrating. Daddy's here. He can hear us. He can be there. Put the music on, and let's just rejoice in the birth of Alan, Matthew, and Michael, my three boys."
I love that.
And then 4 years later, I had another son, a singleton.
Wow.
One baby. It's a joke.
I love that. Exactly, especially the workload, right?
Yeah.
But I love that your mom was like, "Okay, we've got to celebrate this." Because, and you know, it sounds like your dad was larger than life. I mean, he was in NYPD. He would have wanted this.
Exactly.
He would have wanted the celebration.
We celebrated his life.
Yes,
Exactly.
Exactly. And also you think about the triplets, and part of your dad is in them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's DNA in there that runs through them.
It's their legacy.
Yes.
You know, you have to keep the memory alive. Even if grandchildren don't have the opportunity to meet Grandpa, they know Grandpa Alex, because it's up to the daughter to teach them about the storytelling. You know, part of the lost narrative is all about the memories that we created as children, teenage years, and you teach them about those stories, and they're passed on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think part of the reason we're all on this earth, all my hosts and all my guests as well as me, is to keep the memories alive. I mean, I know that my children know my brother, and they've never met him.
Right.
I mean, my son is 20, and my daughter's 13, and they know him because I'm constantly talking about Scott. What he does, what he loved, you know, it's just part of the fabric of our lives. So with that note, I'm wondering to talk to Gary for a minute here. And the same question. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you into working at the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation. And you know, I know we talked on our podcast with you about how significant it was that you were only 5 and had your dad die, and what it's looked like over the life course for you.
Yeah, there couldn't be more of a contrast between this story and mine. At 5 years old, you see an ambulance outside of your front house, and I remember saying, I hope it's nothing wrong with my mother. And I ran around and went into the back door of the house, and there were tons of neighbors and family members. And it turned out to be my father, who had died of a massive heart attack when I was 5, and he was, I think, 36.
Wow, he was young.
The stoicism in my family was very strong. There was no sharing traditions, no rituals, no talking about it. It was really just keep a stiff upper lip and get through it on your own. There was no therapy. There was no discussions with my mother or my brother. And so it was really had to handle it on my own. I didn't handle it very well in the beginning. I think I went through maybe 2 years or 3 years of blackout, not really knowing, not true blackout, but not having any memories whatsoever of those years.
It must have been confusing too. You're 5 years old and your dad dies and nobody's talking about it.
Well, you have guilt, you have fear. Throughout my life, when I turned 36, I assumed I was going to die too. And so each year up to that, you're 28, you're thinking about 36, you're 32, you're thinking about 36. So the whole life is defined by that. But it's been defined not only in a negative way, just through the pain that I felt, but also in a positive way. What I've done for myself is chosen positions, jobs, courses of action that help to challenge the sort of isolation that I had in my life. And so taking the job at the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation was precisely that. There is a large population of parents who are in bereavement. Maybe a third of the children with brain tumors do not survive. That's a shocking number. Tens of thousands still survive, but the numbers that don't are still substantial, and there's way too many. So what I am, by putting myself in the position of being president of the Brain Tumor Foundation, I'm able to at least deal with their pain and have it inform my own approach to my situation.
Well, what's interesting and what's coming up for me, Gary, is that when you first approached me to be on your advisory board, you said, Heidi, we want to expand the sibling program for siblings that are grieving. And I think about your own personal situation. Here you are 5 without support. And now, all these years later, you are giving kids support that are grieving.
That's a great insight. Also, you know, I have to think, I think about my brother as well. My brother and I went through this together. We're not very close then. We're not very close now. And I think had we been able to discuss it over time, it would have been a lot closer. So siblings in every situation matter.
I agree, and it sounds like there was this idea that in your family there was kind of an unspoken norm that we don't speak about these things.
There was
we don't
indeed.
talk about them. And I'm also thinking with kids, if they don't have all the information, what I find often is that they fill it in with really scary information.
Oh.
Like, yes, it is scary that your dad died of a heart attack, but there was a reason. I know a lot of kids are told that, you know, loved ones have died in their sleep, and that's really scary.
That's what I was told.
That's what you were told?
Yes.
That's terrifying. I think of being a kid, I would be afraid to go to sleep if I was told that. So what's comforting, it sounds like for adults, is not comforting for 5-year-olds.
No. And you have to work yourself through that. There's a prayer about going to sleep, and if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I hate thinking of that every time I went to sleep. But it was transformed through my own life into poetry, into writing. So I've been able to deal with that also in a creative way, as a portion of that poem went into, or that prayer went into my own poetry and my own work.
I love how you transformed it into a positive. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you both have found hope and what you've gone on to do. I think right now what I'm going to do is show the clip of the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation and everything that you're doing, because you are doing phenomenal work there.
Thank you.
The Children's Brain Tumor Foundation is the nation's leader in quality of life programs for families with children affected by brain and spinal cord tumors. Connecting survivors, parents, and families through creative evidence-based programs, we build community while providing compassion and companionship. Please join us as we celebrate our 30th anniversary and build a stronger organization for the future. The Children's Brain Tumor Foundation, community and companionship on your journey.
Wow, Gary, it's such a phenomenal organization. Tell me exactly everything, that, all your services and what you do.
Oh my, it's
The services with the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation.
quite extensive, online, in person, and national. So there are 28,000 survivors of children's brain tumors. They're all over the country, and wherever we go, we find many of the same stories. I feel isolated. My daughter or my son has no friends. They can't find a job. They live at home. And so there is just a very extensive needs, everything from just a sense of community that they belong to something and they're not alone, to finding a career and a job. So, and everything in between. We're hosting something that perhaps you'll want to come to on September 29th is a kids cruise. We bring kids from really the whole eastern seaboard onto some massive ship on the Hudson and take them on a cruise to give them a day free from children's brain tumors and just have fun and be kids.
That's amazing. So they all get on this boat and just play together. And you know what I also love? The fact that they're together. They don't need to talk to each other to heal. They just, I mean, about what's going on, but just knowing that they're not alone and that there's other kids, right?
Yeah.
Is so powerful.
Very.
And just being on that boat together.
Yeah. So it's not just about being in a small group therapy session and working through your issues, or going to a summer camp that we offer with a more extended set of programs. One day of fun on board a ship, I think it's a charm.
That's phenomenal. And the other thing I want to say for everybody out there that's watching is you are doing a lot of things online. There's online support groups going on so that, like as you said, you don't have to be here in New York City. Jessica, your social worker, runs a lot of these, and we had her on a show recently with you. And I think that's great because people don't have to leave their house, like you said, to get help.
Yeah, we're finding Facebook a great help in bringing people together from all over the country.
I love it. So let's go back to Barbara and talk about. I want to get out there also the things that you're doing, because you're doing so much, and I want you to tell the world in case someone needs to talk to you and get your services.
Well, I'm, excuse me, I'm a consultant with the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime. So homicide co-victims, those who've lost their family members to violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault and murder. I do presentations for the professionals to train and teach professionals how to work with homicide co-victims, because so many people do not know sudden violent traumatic loss and how to provide support. I was a hospice pastoral bereavement coordinator for many years. It's not the same as when you get to say goodbye.
Right.
So I teach professionals through trainings and keynotes how to work with those who are experiencing real traumatized grief. And my whole specialty changed in the last 5 years. I've moved from grief, death, dying, bereavement, even though I'm an expert in that field, I've now moved from thanatology to compassion, fatigue, and vicarious trauma. Because I'm finding that too many therapists, social workers, psychologists do not want to take any more suicidal patients. They don't want to work with any other traumatized, grieving folk because they can't hear one more story. And we must keep professionals healthy so they can continue doing the great job working with those who are bereaved and traumatized.
I totally agree with you, Barbara. And I'm going to guess that a lot of what you're teaching the professionals can be applied to family members because they have their own traumatic stories, and you know they're exhausted by the fact that they've been through a trauma as well.
Absolutely. The caregivers themselves even if working with someone who's not traumatically bereaved, people are stressed out.
Yes.
They're burned out.
Yeah.
They're experiencing secondary traumatic stress, and they're just exhausted, and they don't know what to do. So my focus is focusing in on your strengths. What are your greatest strengths? Is it, like for me, it's love of learning. So I'm constantly reading the research. So I know what studies point in the direction of helping you based on all the research out there.
Right.
Or perhaps it's wisdom or laughter. I think we have to look to what is our strength? What character trait can we rely on to get us through? And utilize it, whether it's working with victims or those who are bereaved, or if you are bereaved.
Yes.
Just get within.
And I love that you are out there as a professional working in trauma because you've personally experienced a trauma.
Yes.
With your dad dying, and I think it's so, you've got one foot in both worlds. You know what it's like, as does Gary, to be that person that's had that significant loss.
But so many of us as professionals have experienced great trauma.
Yes.
That's why we move into the field.
Well, that's the interesting, and sometimes we don't even know that that's what we're doing.
Right.
I mean, my brother died over 30 years ago, and the fire department tried to save him. You know, he was in a car that caught on fire, he and my cousin, and they both died at 17. Well, fast forward after 2000, after 9/11, I moved to New York City to work with the fire department, not connecting them at the time, not connecting them. And it wasn't for a couple of years later that I went, wait a minute, this is all connected. They tried to help us, and now I'm paying it forward. So yes, so I want to know from both of you how you feel that you found hope after the losses in your life, the death of your dad, both the deaths of your dad. What things helped you? What things have helped you in your life?
I'll just mention one, if I may.
Yes, go for
By
it.
the way, we work with pediatric oncological social workers around the country. There's compassion fatigue there as well, and so we're trying to deal with that too. It's a real issue. One thing that has transformed my life was when my son was born. I didn't know how much and how important that was. He's now turned 21.
Wow.
He's becoming a chef at the Culinary Institute of America.
Oh, nice.
But when he was born, I was so proud and so happy, and it transformed. I think I lifted from a lifetime of pain. So for me, his birth allowed me to move forward in my own life.
It's interesting. That was a significant moment for me also. My son is almost the same age as yours. He's 20. But there's something about losing people in your family, people dying and then people coming in. It was very therapeutic and healing for me when Alexander was born as well.
There were two transformative events in my life: the death of my father and the birth of my son.
Yeah, interesting. And so what about you, Barbara? Does that resonate with you?
Without question.
Okay.
And I think that God's greatest gift to us is our memory. That when my dad died, his memory did not die with him taking his last breath. So we are free will. We can share stories. So how wonderful that I have the opportunity today to spend some time talking about my dad. I think we need to keep talking about our loved ones, whether they died 10 years ago, 50 years ago, or yesterday, and just keep sharing the story. Just keep talking about them. It feels good. You may cry, but you're not going to cry as much as you did a year ago.
Right.
You know, and so you're still going to feel the pain, but it won't be as intense. But keep their name alive, keep their memory alive, and get through the tears and keep sharing that story. I think that's hopeful.
I agree with you. And the thing about social media, one of the positives is I can talk about my brother on my site and say, wow, I really miss him. Today was his birthday. Or, you know, I'm thinking about him today. The New York Jets won because he was a big Jets fan. And people will come in and leave commentary. They often don't know him. But I also get things from friends of his that were in his high school class many years later.
Wow.
They'll give me stories that I never knew even existed.
Wow.
And I'm like, what a gift. You know, I don't know if you've ever done this, Gary, because you were only 5, but going to your dad's friends and getting stories maybe that you'd never heard. I don't know if you ever did that.
I didn't have the opportunity. My brother was more of the family connector in our family. He was the eldest. He's 2 years older than I am. And so I let him have that role. So he did that, and I didn't. I felt that at least someone in the family was doing it.
And are you able to hear stories now that maybe you didn't know about your dad, or not really?
There weren't very many stories, at least none that I was told, although people told me that I looked like him.
Oh, wow.
And so that helped a lot in just knowing that I was carrying something with me that was a part of him.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing. So what else has helped you? What else has helped you? And what do you think helps people out there that are grieving? I mean, you're both in the field, and what kind of things have you seen has helped people?
Support groups.
Okay.
I swear by support groups. I facilitated a suicide survivor support group for about 10 years, and then Alzheimer's groups and all kinds of different types of groups. And if you're a talker, it's not for everyone, but if you're like a real intuitive type griever, it's great. You get a chance to talk and share and emote and be with others who've experienced similar losses. So I think support groups are great. Books are wonderful. They can go to Compassion Books or Centering Corp or join ADEC, the Association for Death Education and Counseling. Get involved with Compassionate Friends. You don't have to just feel and think, but you could actually take action to feel good.
Yeah, I love the idea of support groups because sometimes you don't realize that you've changed. Sometimes when you're in a space of grief, you don't realize that you've moved further down the road until someone that's newer in their grief comes into the group. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not in that place anymore. I'm in a different place now.
And then you could help them.
Yes,
and it feels
absolutely.
good to say,
Yeah.
I feel like my story helped them.
Well, you're bringing up a good point. You're both of service. And I think there's nothing that helps our soul and helps us better than service, being of service to somebody else. Kind of getting outside of ourselves and serving somebody else.
My whole life has been doing that, so it's nice of you to point that out. I mean, it really is. It is what like you weren't quite clear what the connection was between serving the fire officers and your own personality, but I wasn't quite sure what the connection was to my own life of service until you start reflecting on it, and then you realize, oh, there's something there.
Yeah, and I'm always saying to people that are really early on, they say, well, Heidi, I can't be of service because I'm grieving and I don't know how to survive. I said, but if you allow people to serve you, you're being of service. So allow people to serve you, and it gives them a whole different way of looking at it. And they're like, oh, I didn't even think of that as being of service. I said, yeah. So, so what do you think is unique about father loss that is different than other kinds of losses for both of you?
I'll just say for me,
Yes.
I mean, I was a young boy at a time when I needed father role models. So it was a male losing his father meant that it was very difficult for me to figure out what direction I should go in life. What road do I take? How do I create my own manhood? There were people tried to bring me father figures, but they often weren't ones that I wanted.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, someone who was a boxer. I wasn't looking for a father who was a boxer or a father figure who was pugnacious. I wanted something else. So it's different. It was different for me, I think, than for many, simply because I was a boy looking for a father figure and had no father available.
Well, and it was interesting because people were bringing you father figures.
They were.
And they
weren't the right ones.
The fit wasn't right.
Right.
Which is so interesting because you kind of, sometimes people assume, oh, if it's a man and he's his father's age, it'll be fine. It'll work.
It ended up being teachers, male teachers who were science professor teachers in middle school that really led me to see what it's like to be a man of knowledge. I thought that was an important role for me to take.
And little did these men know what an influence they had on you.
I had no idea.
Because then you ended up going into, you were a professor for a long time and you got a PhD and going into these kind of things because you saw men that were further along in their life doing that.
That's what I needed in my life.
Yes.
I had to find them myself, though.
Well, we never know who's watching us and who's looking at us and what we mean to someone. And what about you, Barbara? What do you think is unique about
I was sitting here trying to think about it, and I was a grown woman about to give birth to triplets, but my daddy died, and I was a little girl. That little inner child, I was still just that little girl. I was that 5-year-old child whose daddy died.
That's fascinating.
That's powerful. Yeah, exactly. And you'd never known your life on the earth without him.
Right. And he didn't get to be a grandpa.
Exactly.
A lot of losses there.
Exactly. And they kind of continue, even though we end up in good spaces and good places, the idea that your dad wasn't a grandpa to your son and your father, not physically anyway. So those are losses that kind of continue. So what one piece of advice would you give people out there right now that have lost hope?
Maintain your sense of humor.
Maintain your sense of humor.
Find joy.
I like that. That's a good one. Humor is big. I love that.
Oh, I'll give you a plug. Watch your shows. Because they really are just inspiring
Yes.
for everyone.
Yes.
Well, yes, it's guests like you that make us who we are
Thank
today.
you.
So yes,
Thank
it's important. And where can our audience find both of you?
Well, with me, it's griefworkcenter.com, or they could just go Barbara Rubel on the internet, and I'm all over the place, speaking and writing and
Griefworkcenter.com. Barbara Rubel.
Yeah.
She's a speaker. She's a trainer. She's a writer. She's an author. Yes.
and
so-
she's a mom of 4 boys.
And she's a mom of
Yay!
4 boys, triplets and a
Yeah,
singleton.
that's
I
it.
learned a lot about singletons because I just did a twinless twin conference.
Okay.
So, and Gary, what about you? Where can people find you?
So we're at Children's Brain Tumor Foundation, which is cbtf.org. And you'll see all of our programs and a bunch of different ways to get in touch with us. including-
cbtf.org, and again, they have phenomenal, a lot of things going on the internet and in person. So please check out both of these organizations. And I want to close our show and thank our guests. Thank you so much
you.
for being on today.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I want to remind everybody out there, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you can find your own. And please visit opentohope.com. Thank you.